Hi, I'm Tyler Harris, and you're listening to the Nebraska Notebook. This week, we're talking with Mike Zwingman, Agronomy R&D Manager at Central Valley Ag, and we're talking from the cab of his pickup here out in Butler County, where it's pouring rain. And Mike, here over the last week, we've started to see growers. A few of them have started planting, and I know soil temperatures have been the mid to upper 50s, depending on where you're at. But as the season has just gotten started for some Nebraska growers, what are some of the ways they can think dynamically in terms of their nitrogen management program? And the second part of that question is how does their planting operation play a role in that first step in terms of stand evaluation and plant population?
Well, it's been a pretty interesting week, Tyler. We had that freeze earlier in the week. It got down to about 24, and it actually took around York or right here at Bellwood, took about 7 degrees off the soil temperature. Matter of fact, we were here at this RD innovation site that we have here just west of Bellwood, and we were doing some soil sampling on Monday, and we pulled 24 Haney tests out here, and we took the soil temperature and we pulled those Haney tests, and the soil temperature was 42 degrees.
Oh, wow.
And so last week, in the last 10 days, the soil temperature really hadn't moved at all. Even with the warm weather we had the weekend previous, we had warm weather, but it was cloudy and hazy, and we weren't getting enough sunlight to really heat the soil. We're getting warm air, but not radiant heat. So as we go into planting, and I've talked to a lot of growers that we've had a few guys wait till later in this week, but this midweek of April, the guys starting like the 13th, 12th, 13th, really just kind of easing into it and being careful. And one of the things we tell our growers, like that soil temperature, we want to be careful with these rains we had, coming up before you plant, is watch that soil temperature and watch what happens in that course of those rain events. If the air temperature really cools when it rains, that corn seed's going to take in cold water. And the first step to nitrogen management is really what we've called managing the sink, right? Make sure we're maximizing our stand percentage. That I'm going to go back to it again. That net effective stand percentage. Maximizing the number of possible ears in the field is our first step to managing our sink, and hoping to get that matched up with our source, the nitrogen we apply and the nitrogen that mineralizes down the road in season. And then watching our planting conditions, watching that wetness and that sidewall compaction, and really the conditions we put root development under, because we need those roots to be able to efficiently uptake nitrogen and drive that nitrogen in the corn plant. Those are the two. Planting as a function of nitrogen is really, that's the two things. The stand establishment and the establishment of good root development are two keys for us.
Yeah. So it's really kind of it's about timing on both of those fronts, planting and nitrogen applications, and evaluating what you have and then adjusting from there. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. I mean, always kind of be moving with the target.
Yeah, it's a moving target. And so moving forward, of course, we've already had a few rain events, obviously, here in Nebraska in April. So one of the things I guess I wanted to talk about was after last year, after all the extreme rainfall events we had, 2016 and 2015, how can we adjust our end management strategies in season? And I guess the follow-up to that is, and this is kind of an open-ended question, but depending on rainfall, how much can growers expect in terms of loss following a rain event, and how to adjust their strategies based on that?
Well, so one, that's where this nitrogen modeling really comes into play. And there's a wide variety of tools to be able to do that out there. Yeah. The other thing is, we can only lose what we have out there, right? So if you have 100% of your nitrogen out there and you lose 20%, that's a lot bigger number than if you have 40% of your nitrogen and you lose 20% of the 40. So we can manage that by managing the complete risk. I tell people is I know this splitting nitrogen application seems a little hectic, especially in lower commodity prices. It would have been really easy for us to say, I'm going to put it all on as anhydrous. That's my cheapest option of nitrogen going forward. But when we do the calculations on how that loss could be affected, it's not necessarily the cheapest nitrogen program when we talk about last dollar spent.
I think in some cases it might be more about management and how much do I have time for too.
Right.
Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but as we've seen in the last couple of years, when we have some of these 5, 6, in some cases 6 or 7 inch rains in eastern Nebraska come up all at once, we don't necessarily know when we're going to be able to get that nitrogen on. So maybe that's part of the mindset too. I don't know.
Right, and that's, I mean, we've had some ridiculous May rains the last few years. Like you look at 2015, 2016, in the areas where we were above rainfall amounts, you could almost take the total May amount, and that's the amount we were above our average rainfall. Like York areas had some 5-6 inch rains consistently in May, and that kind of puts a crick in our nitrogen application windows, because we're planting corn today and it takes 525 GDUs to get it to V5. We're looking at about a first to second week of June time frame of that corn being there. And if we get those heavy rains and we can't get in the field, and then we push to V7, V8, the thing is, if we go that route, we have to make sure the tank never runs empty.
Yeah.
So planning enough cushion and finding that sweet spot between what we can do from a splitting our nitrogen application, but have enough in reserve that if we get rained out for a little bit, we can ride that out. And so you're juggling. I don't want to lose it, but I don't want to be short. That's the magic of nitrogen management. It really comes down to how comfortable you are, like, riding to that line.
Yeah, and adjusting based on what the conditions are and what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and that's where having a good trusted advisor that knows your risk tolerance can help you walk through that and find a nitrogen plan that's right for you.
And that's going to be important, I guess, relative to the next question I have, Mike. When we talk about, you mentioned nitrogen modeling tools, and then we've talked in the past about pre-side dress nitrate tests, and then some of the other tools, whether it be remote sensing, NDVI, some of those imagery tools to adjust our plan moving forward. What are some of the roles those play from an integrated management approach if we look at the whole system moving forward and what the grower's comfortable with?
I think we're at a point in nitrogen management with some of these tools where, from the pre-side dress nitrate test, which is something that's got some age and a lot of data behind it and a lot of work, but it's still got a lot of its flaws, and a lot of that's in how you pull the sample or when you pull the sample and all those things. But then we go to the nitrogen models, which are really, really, really interesting and show a lot of promise, but still to a certain extent relatively untested. And then you have some of the remote sensing technologies, which I think also have a lot of promise and a lot of upside and a lot of utility, but they also bring a lot of questions. So when you're a grower, you look at this toolbox, and I'm not going to say you have to use you pick the one that you think is best for you, and then latch yourself with the people with enough knowledge to make it work in your operation. And I think that's a pretty stout way of going forward with it. And not everybody's going to be an expert in all these tools, and so you have to kind of find the person that you trust enough, and that you value their experience and their knowledge enough.
And that also has the working knowledge of your farm too,
right?
Your ground.
And the idea of, I freely admit that there are days I look at the nitrogen cycle and I wonder, do I know any of it, and do I understand it enough to be that aggressive? And the idea of, if you have somebody that thinks they know they have it figured out, that might not be the right person to be running with, because chances are they don't. Mm-hmm. Because this thing is really, really dynamic in a lot of different ways, with your yield moving in one way and the soil and the nitrogen cycle moving in another. How do you kind of blend those two things together?
Yeah. Well, and because it's so specific to the situation and what the grower's comfortable with, one of the things I wanted to do, Mike, was to set up kind of a hypothetical situation, if we're looking at a situation where we've had some of these past rain events like we did last year on typical silty clay loam soil like we might have in southeast Nebraska, and we're planting it in a corn and soybean rotation, what are the things that we might consider in terms of using some of those crop model tools in terms of moving forward?
I mean, if we take this site we're sitting here today, right?
Yeah.
The Bellwood Bottom, the Platte River Valley, and pretty black soil. Like I said, cool soil temperatures. We're just applying nitrogen here this week. Basically, we put down 90 pounds of stabilized N here, and we'll come back with side dress application. Then there'll be a fertigation treatment on it. So understanding the model of we've put 90 pounds on, but here's our plan. And then you kind of just have to be willing to take a look at that model every day, and every time you want to make a decision, you look at the model, and then you use your experience as your guide too, of saying, okay, this seems right, this seems way off. And if there's something that there's a discrepancy between what the model says and your gut, you go and you do what you need to do to investigate it. Maybe you go do some soil sampling. Maybe you do some tissue sampling. Maybe you just wait for a warmer day, different day to check the model and see if it rides true again. But the trend is always going to show you about where you need to be. And the thing about models we have to remember is there's this, when you talk about algorithmic years, right?
Yeah.
So if we were modeling weather, and we want to look at the long-term forecast, they would take a bunch of years of weather data, but say, okay, based on what we know, these are the 5 years that we're going to use to put in our algorithm and to model off of, to say that 2017 is like these 5 years. Well, in our head, we can always, I'm not that old, right? But I can tell you what the summer of 1996 was like. I can tell you roughly about the summer of 1989. I can tell you what I remember of different growing seasons. And so you need to sit there, and when you look at that average on, let's just say you're looking at Climate Field Views model, and it says, you're here today, but our range is anywhere from 10 pounds above or 10 pounds below. You have to sit there and say, okay, based on my experience in my farm, I'm going to say if these are the years, if it's like this year, I'm going to ride down the line. If it's like this year, I'm going to ride up the line, because there's people that have been farming some of this ground for 30 or 40 years. There's nothing a model or I will tell you that should surprise you.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the day. And so like you can use that information and then run some scenario, like take some time to say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to see where the model is right for me based on what I do and how I go about my business.
Kind of a real world calibration.
Right, and calibrate it yourself, because that's the only way you're going to build more trust in them, is by, if it says you're going to have 50 pounds of excess and you got 50 pounds left to apply, maybe on a certain number of acres you don't apply it. Maybe on a certain number of acres you split the difference, and maybe a certain amount of acres you do what you're going to do, and you just see where you end up. Because at the end of the day, nitrogen's still one of the biggest drivers of yield in corn, and also has the greatest amount of line item cost. So you can't just all or nothing right away. You got to figure out what's right from you. And you got to, like nitrogen stabilizers, I'm going to make just an observational statement, but when we're into April and the soil temperatures are still cool, we probably this spring, if you applied anhydrous a month ago, we haven't had a whole lot of mineralization because the soil hasn't. It's gotten warm for a few days and then it cools back down, and this oscillation of temperature, we're still mineralizing nitrogen, but we're doing it at a lower rate than we would in a typical year. So, and to a certain extent, it was probably a good thing when it was March. It was warm but wet, and we didn't get into the field in some cases. Now, if you applied last fall, that warm and wet in March is going to cause a little different curve. So there's going to be a bigger gap between fall and spring. But maybe spring, if you're between a stabilizer and no stabilizer, it might be harder to detect the difference. Well, this is why right here today we're doing a leaching trial, and we're actually going to put different stabilizers in a replicated trial together, and we're actually going to measure amount of nitrates that end up in the water around that red zone.
Well, that's something else I wanted to ask about, Mike. Since we're here at the demonstrations at the Bellwood demonstration site, what all are some of the trials going on?
So we got some cool stuff here, and I can geek out all day long. But we got a traditional hybrid and variety trial, so you can come see the big hot numbers for 2018. And that's important, right? That's hybrid selection is still one of the most important decisions we make. But like as we move back, we're going to have a multi-hybrid demo. We're going to have things around planting depth, sidewall compaction, and if it stays like this, that'll be a really fun demonstration to have, because I can go mud a little bit of corn in to do it. And some info technologies that we're launching, some of the plant growth assimilators, plant growth regulators, new F&I combinations, seed treatments in soybeans, the same deal. Keith and I are going to have a nitrogen and water management block. Big surprise to everybody that hears us talk. And one of the things we're going to do there is we're going to show things like we're going to have multiple aqua systems probes out here in different places in the field to show different things. And in that block in particular, we're going to talk about how plants use nitrogen and water differently at higher populations. And so talk about water use at a higher population, how that implicates our irrigation.
Well, that
strategies.
ties into the net effective stand percentage too.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And so then we're going to have all these different things. We're going to have a high yield corn and soybean trial. So like all the things we've heard about after the high yield winners come talk in Nebraska. I'm not going to try to set any records here, right? But what we're going to try to do is take the 4 ACS professional ag services leaders, and we're going to say, as us 4 agronomists, here's what we think is the most profitable acre you could farm, and here's what we're going to do. And here's how we're going to implement our technologies. And then there'll be a theme through all this is kind of some changes in the way we do grid and zone sampling, and some interesting changes in our fertilizer recommendation process for 2018, the fall of 2018 growing season, that we're going to start hinting at in the summer, but really talk about this one thought process that's going to encompass everything we do here, from hybrid selection to how you tie that into a multi-hybrid prescription and use downforce and seeding depth, and how you use nitrogen stabilizers and variable rate nitrogen prescriptions and irrigation management to really encompass everything all at once.
Yeah, to bring it into an integrated systems approach, because sometimes I think we tend to look at things in silos like that when we really need to be looking at the whole system.
We make one decision at a time.
Yeah.
Right. And we're going to show you the pieces of all the thing, and then we're going to take, and that's what this high yield, we call it, for lack of a better term, this corn and soybean management block. It's going to be like, how do we take all the things and build one system, and really kind of this long-term thought process of how. And then, like, if you're here in your operation and you like what you see there, what are the steps we take to manage you to there over time?
And that's an important piece to have, Mike, because, and we've talked in the past about this, about driving adoption at the farm level. You know, it's best to have that system built in where the grower themselves can see what's going on here, and here's an example of what I can do to adopt, because nobody wants to be told I'm doing something wrong. It's just they're doing things for the most part very efficiently. It's just, here are a few steps we can take to adjust and fine-tune and improve.
Yeah, like, no doubt in my mind, the growers here do a lot of great things, right? And there's going to be a lot of things here that growers already do.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But there's going to be a few things they don't.
Yeah.
But we've always spent our time talking about the what you should do and the why you should do it. In August, what we're going to spend time here doing is talking about the how it gets done. The how we come to the solutions we bring you. Like when we talk about the multi-hybrid prescription, we're going to talk about the question we have as a team about how do you match two hybrids together on things other than maturity, like ear height, plant type, dry down, things that if we missed on, the technology kind of fleets itself away, right? Like if we write you a really good multi-hybrid prescription, but there's 3 percentage points difference in moisture, and you have a drying nightmare, more than likely it's going to take you a long time to come back to that multi-hybrid prescription. So like, how do we start to look at hybrids differently on things other than yield and more of those plant characteristics things and match them up? And that's the how discussion we're going to have.
And the how takes time. I mean, that's something that doesn't happen in 1 year to get all those answers, of course. And that's one of the questions we see being asked.
And what we want is, like, this is going to be a completely integrated event, right? Like, so what we want is we want you to challenge us on the how. I mean, I wrote an article a week ago and about the sink source relationship, and I've had a few questions on like how I thought about that. That's good because we get to have a discussion about it, right? Like, it's no longer us preaching to you about what you should do. It's taking that thought process of, if one of you has a question, I guarantee all of you do, or 80% of you have the same question. How do we pluck that out and talk about, you know, this is how we got to here. And we're going to try to do some other things here. Like, I have a few wish list of non-grower events that would still impact your operation, and that I want to bring some different groups here. Like, I'd really like to see a group of lenders come and talk about the why we do things and how it impacts the bottom line and how they work and why they're part. Like, we've gotten to a point where we're raising the corn we are because of the things we do. And if we start taking away some of the things we do, this is what could happen. Right? And so we need to have an honest discussion about...
Well, and to continually push the limits of what we're doing, we need to expand upon what we're doing too.
Right. So, and what looks like a necessity to me, to somebody else looks like a luxury item. Right? And so, like, we need to have those discussions. We might bring some non-ag people, period, out here and just talk about, from a stewardship standpoint, why things like the nitrogen stabilizer trial and the water management trial, why do those things matter?
Yeah, and why do they matter as they relate to each other too?
Right.
Yeah.
The example this week we need to continue to have more conversations like this about in agriculture is the situation. I mean, you and I both live in Lincoln, is the burning of Kansas, and all of a sudden now the state of Nebraska but I got in a Twitter discussion with somebody in Lincoln right all day a week ago about, well, it's a solid agricultural practice we've been doing for years, but we need to keep having those discussions with non-ag users about where
the why and the how we got to that point.
And I said just go back and look at the wildfires of Kansas, and look at in Texas and Oklahoma, and look at the devastation there, and say, okay, we get to make a choice, and this is just a nuisance to us. But the implications we have, I mean, we can see the Platte River from here. From where we sit, you can't see the river, but you can see where the river is from here. We're 2.25 miles away from the Platte River.
Over the tree line.
Just right over the tree line there. Like, what we do here has a water implication right here. What we do at Randolph has a water implication. And comparing the two sites, night and day difference. Like, this is a really, really phenomenal. I mean, I was telling a friend of mine last night, growing up in Antelope County, I never dreamed I would farm ground like this, and today I attempted to until it started raining. Right? Last night I did, and but then I go to Randolph, and it's great soil, but like from a fertility standpoint, we have some work to do.
Well, and that's the amazing thing too, and we see that in the Nitrogen Water Advisory Group, where we have these producers coming together that are from all these different backgrounds within Nebraska, and they have all these different systems that fit their management styles, what they're comfortable with, and what their necessities are. It's just a wide range. And
so, like, the trick is, how do we take what's all here and fit it into that wider group of needs and wants and constraint and everything else? Because every operation is going to have constraints in different places. They're going to be willing to do things at different times because of labor and because of just the way they're set up. But how do we take all this and make that work? And I think that's kind of the cool part. And absolutely, that's the fun part of this, is we're doing things that matter here and have direct impacts on your bottom line, the future of your operation. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if this fall we don't put some cover crops in here to add one more challenge to my spring next
just
year,
one more
right?
layer.
One more layer of fun, right? and have an honest discussion about these things in the future, because at the end of the day, what I want all the growers to know is from today on forward, this is your site. So like if I had 100 growers tell me in 2018 they want to see this, in 2018 that's what they'll get to see, right? Like this is, the circus is coming to town, but we're only going to bring the acts you want to see, right? Like I think that's one of the neat things here. And then how do we have that discussion of what tools do we use to manage nitrogen? And that answer is not as clear cut to everybody as we'd like it to be, right? Like,
yeah.
And so how do we as a cooperative and agronomists become better suited to answer the questions you need and with the information and tools that you want to use?
Yeah.
And that's our challenge. Like that's our job to get that done.
Well, we'll continue this discussion as this season progresses, and you can learn more on upcoming Nebraska farmer issues. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and thanks for listening to the Nebraska Notebook.